The morning came in slow, the way winters on base always did. A pale sheet of fog drifted over the barracks, soft enough to hide the cracks in the old concrete walls. The parade ground lay still, snow settling on top of yesterday's footprints, erasing whatever the night had carried in. I remember sitting up, before my eyes were even fully open, the silence heavy, the kind that presses against the ribs. Then came the knock. Not sharp, not urgent, just familiar. The kind of knock a soldier uses when he doesn't want to wake ghosts. I knew before opening the door that nothing good arrives at dawn. He stood there with a dossier tucked under one arm, frost settling on his sleeves like ash. A junior officer, couldn't have been more than 20. He didn't look at me. They never do when they carry something classified. It's a strange kind of respect, or guilt. Hard to tell which most days. "Orders from command, sir." His voice was steady, but his jaw worked as if he were chewing on something bitter. I took the folder. Cold cardboard, edges frayed from hands that held it before him. Someone had passed this down a chain of people who didn't want to be the final link. He turned and walked off without waiting for acknowledgement, boots crunching over thin snow. His footprints filled in quickly as the wind dragged new flakes across them. Inside my quarters, I sat on the bunk. Springs groaned beneath me like an old man shifting in his sleep. The overhead bulb flickered once, humming in that tired way it always did. I set the folder on my knee, staring at the red seal. I'd seen thousands like it, reports, intercepted transmissions, personnel files, but something about this one made the room feel smaller, like the air had thickened. My gloves were still damp when I broke the seal. A faint metallic smell rose from the paper, like old keys in a forgotten drawer. And then I saw the name. Ivan Kravchenko. The letters didn't shout at me. They just sat there, cold, waiting. I blinked once, slow. It had been years since I heard anyone speak that name aloud, mostly older intelligence officers, the ones who drank after curfew and whispered about things command preferred to bury. Kravchenko. The Soviet colonel who nearly pulled off the unthinkable. The man who tried, at least according to rumor, to hand the West a piece of the USSR so dangerous it could have cracked open the whole Cold War. A warhead, or the command structure behind one. No one ever agreed on the details, and no one ever confirmed them. Files disappeared. Witnesses reassigned, the kind of story that lived only in smoke-filled rooms and late-night murmurs. Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper. Thin, crisp. Too crisp for something supposedly decades old. There were handwritten coordinates, a date, and just 3 words beneath them. He's still alive. My thumb brushed the edge of the page. It trembled, though my hand didn't. The floor was colder than I remembered. Concrete, unpainted, smooth from years of boots dragging over it. Somewhere above me, a vent rattled softly, like a breath held too long. The NATO archive room hadn't changed in decades. Light flickered through bulletproof glass, gray and tired. Dust floated in slow motion, like snow that had forgotten where to land. I closed the door behind me. The lock clicked, like a memory I wasn't ready for. I had been here before, many times in many winters. This room didn't just store records. It stored the smell of old metal, the weight of things that should have been burned, and the silence of men who disappeared without a trace. My gloves creaked as I flipped the light switch. The ceiling buzzed, then gave in, casting a pale yellow over the files like prison light. Row after row of steel cabinets stood like sentries. Each one held names of men, missions, lies. Some folders were thicker than others. The thicker ones never had happy endings. I walked to the far wall. Drawers screeched when opened, the way old doors complain in buildings no one should be in after dark. K. Kravchenko. Ivan. His name was there, not bold, not highlighted, just present. I pulled the file. It was lighter than I expected. There were only a few pages inside. Typed on a manual machine, ink faded, letters crooked. The first page was a short transcript. 1975, location, Finnish safe house. I read slowly. Every word felt like it cost someone something. Subject claims intent to defect. Delivered partial schematics of modified SS-20 warhead system. Psychological state, highly alert, paranoid, lucid. The next page was redacted, whole paragraphs blacked out like spilled ink. One sentence survived. He insists there are more, says he wasn't alone. I stared at those 6 words. Each one had weight. Not alone. I turned the page. Final entry. Case terminated. Lack of confirmed.
The road to the bunker was narrow, silent, and older than the maps suggested. Trees leaned inward, their branches skeletal under frost, like they were trying to shield the road, or warn it. Snow clung to the ground in thin, icy veins. The tires of my Jeep crunched over frozen dirt, slow and deliberate, like I wasn't supposed to be here. No signs, no guards, just a rusted chain draped across a fallen post, and the kind of silence that made your ears ring. I parked and stepped out. The cold wasn't sharp. It was still, heavy, as if the forest had decided to hold its breath. They said the site was decommissioned in '78, but the coordinates in Kravchenko's file pointed here, dead center of the old launch grid near Plesetsk. I walked slowly, one boot sinking deeper than the other. The earth here didn't feel like ground. It felt like memory. 20 meters in, I saw it. A bunker door, half buried under pine needles and thyme. Steel, oxidized to a brown black. Hinges bent. No markings left. I ran my glove across its surface. Flakes of rust fell like ash. The air smelled like wet rock and old oil, like a place that had tried very hard to be forgotten. No power, no cameras, just an old latch. The village was a dot on the map. No paved roads, no streetlights. Just roofs buried under snow, chimneys breathing faint trails of smoke into a sky the color of lead. I arrived just after dusk, the kind of dusk that comes early in places the world forgets. A wooden sign leaned sideways at the edge of the main road. No name, no welcome, only chipped red paint and silence. My boots sank with each step, crunching through layers of old snow and older memories. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then stopped. That was the first sound I'd heard in miles. I carried the photo in my chest pocket, creased now, slightly damp from the cold. I'd looked at it too many times on the drive. The man in the Polaroid wasn't facing the camera, but something about the posture, the shoulders, it sat wrong in my chest. There were rumors, buried in side notes, passed between retired officers in smoke-filled halls, that a man had shown up here sometime in the late '70s, alone, silent, wore no coat even in the dead of winter. They called him the man without winter. He never spoke, just worked odd jobs, slept in abandoned sheds, then vanished. No records, no family, no name. I stopped at a weathered cabin near the edge of town. An old woman sat on the porch, mending a torn glove. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You came looking for the quiet man," she said, without raising her eyes. I nodded. "He left a long time ago, but he never really left." She motioned to the edge of the woods.
Go before it gets dark." I asked her what his name was. She looked up for the first time. He never said, but he dreamed in Russian. The path behind the village was barely visible, more animal trail than road. Trees formed a canopy overhead, branches stitched together like old scars. I followed a narrow bend past a collapsed shed, half-eaten by moss and time. The air grew colder the deeper I walked, not in temperature, but in weight, like the woods were holding something. Near a frozen creek, I found the clearing, a ring of stones, blackened in the middle. Old fire pit, maybe a place to sleep, maybe something older. Scattered nearby were pages, thin, brittle, like paper meant to be burned, but forgotten in the wind. I knelt to pick one up.
The snow fell heavier in Helsinki. Wide flakes, slow, the kind that blurred buildings into shadows and made headlights look like floating ghosts. I stood outside a cafe, tucked behind a post office, 3 streets from the embassy. It had no sign, no music, just a red door that stuck when pushed, and a bell that didn't ring. Inside, the warmth smelled like dust and old wood, coffee that had been reheated too many times. She sat at the far corner table, fingers wrapped around a porcelain cup that hadn't been refilled in hours. Her coat was military issue, Finnish, outdated but clean. Her eyes met mine. Not surprised, not curious, just tired. She was a former field officer. Signals, Northern Sector. Cold War assignment turned archivist after her partner disappeared during a border intel op in '79. "I don't usually talk to your kind," she said. "No malice, just matter of fact." I told her I wasn't there to reopen anything, just to listen. She slid a small envelope across the table, brown paper, no markings. Inside was a faded Polaroid. Krevchenko, or a man who could be him, wrapped in a wool blanket, face hollow, eyes sunken, sitting in a metal chair with NATO stenciled faintly on the wall behind him. "This was 11 days after he crossed the border," she said. "He wouldn't sleep. He barely ate, but he talked. A lot." She tapped her finger against the photo. "We recorded everything. And then he vanished." I asked her how. She shook her head. "No transport record, no witness statements, no exit footage. He just wasn't there the next morning." She took a sip of cold coffee. "When I asked about it, they reassigned me to records. Basement floor. No windows." I followed her later that day to a storage facility outside the city. No signage, no cameras, just a keypad, a creaking metal gate, and a long corridor lined with lockers. Unit 17 was at the far end. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting. Inside, boxes, dusty, some still marked temporary, do not archive. She reached for a carton labeled Op Foxlight and pulled out a tape recorder. Worn leather strap, Soviet-made. She pressed play. The ice cracked beneath the wheels as the Jeep climbed the last ridge. Not a sound, but wind. Dry, sharp. The kind that strips paint off steel and memory off bone. Ahead stood the listening station. Outpost 14K. Decommissioned, buried halfway into the rock like it had crawled there to die. The dish still pointed skyward, frozen mid-turn. The tower lights hadn't blinked in years. Inside, the air smelled of cold metal, battery acid, and the faint, wet rot of insulation gone bad. Everything felt like it had been left in a hurry. But the coffee mug on the console was clean. Someone had come back. I'd found the reference buried in an old satellite log.
Just 2 words. Foxlight ping. The timestamp was wrong, 6 years after Kravchenko vanished. But the signal signature matched the voice print logged during his safe house debrief. Impossible. Or planted. Or both. The outpost had been shut down officially in 1984, but the private contractor who ran it still received maintenance funds until 1991. Inside the control room, dust covered most of the equipment, except the main terminal. Someone had been here recently. The screen was wiped clean, and the console's keyring still hung, warm to the touch, like someone had just left it there. I booted the system. Old DOS-style interface, grainy green flicker. Last transmission, November 3, 1982. Signal, encrypted burst tone. No voice, just modulation. Then I noticed the file name, kr75 return.wave. My fingers hovered. I hit play. The static began softly, like wind over wire. Then a click. A long silence. And then his voice. They told me not to speak, so I waited. But you're listening again, aren't you? The tone was unmistakable. It was Kravchenko, older, slower, but it was him. If this reaches you, they failed. A crackle, another pause. In the background, wind.
The archive was hidden beneath the old NATO compound. No signs, no access badge. You needed a key and a memory. I had both. The air was dry, with a faint scent of rusted steel and moldy insulation. The light above the stairwell flickered once and surrendered. Down here, time held still. Boxes didn't move, dust didn't fall. It just hovered, waiting. I followed the corridor to locker 9, past a collapsed vent and a dead insect caught mid-crawl. Inside the metal cabinet, beneath case logs and redacted summaries, sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Soviet, type 203-B, and next to it, a dog tag. Brown with age. Blood type, A-. Name, I. Kravchenko. I'd seen hundreds of dog tags, bent, burned, etched with final notes or prayers, but this one was clean, preserved, almost too intact. I turned it over. The back had a small scratch, accidental maybe, or someone trying to scrape off what was once engraved. I held it tighter than I meant to. This tag wasn't listed in the original Safe House report, which meant either it was never meant to be filed, or it had been added later by someone who knew it mattered. I looked at the tape machine. The reel had a strip of masking tape across the edge. One word written in faded ink. End. I pressed play. The machine hesitated before the wheels turned. His voice emerged slowly, thicker than before, but unmistakably his. I thought silence would protect me. He paused. But silence is a kind of permission, isn't it? There was a tremor now. Less soldier, more man. They said the West would save me, that truth had value. But it's not truth they wanted. Just a story they could burn when the wind changed. He coughed once, weak. Funny, isn't it? How even betrayal has boundaries. The audio cracked, likely from damage or rage. Then static, long. Then a whisper. They're in the system. Not Russian, not ours. Something else. And then something strange. He began speaking in another language. Not Russian, not English. Something older, or maybe just gibberish from a mind breaking. I checked the timestamp. The tape was recorded March.
The road had no name. It snaked through the Bavarian Alps like a scar. Thin, pale and forgotten. Old NATO maps listed it as Transit Route B12, but no current records acknowledged its existence. Just a faded trail of gravel buried under frost and pine needles. I stood where the asphalt ended. Behind me, miles of documented territory. Ahead, nothing but quiet trees and a story no one ever finished. The wind moved through the forest like something breathing through its teeth, and somewhere up ahead, 4 armored vehicles had entered this path in 1975. They were never seen again. The convoy log was simple. June 9th, 1975. Origin, Safe House Number 6, West Germany. Destination, classified. Cargo manifest, unknown. Personnel, 6. Escorts, 2 unmarked jeeps. A routine handoff, the kind that happened 100 times during the Cold War. But this time, there was no return log, no distress call, no wreckage, no debrief, just silence. I'd found the report buried inside a dead field officer's desk, paper-clipped to a memo marked, "Do not pursue." But someone had. Locals told stories. A rumble in the night, lights in the trees, snow falling too fast. Then, nothing. One old man, a retired forester, agreed to walk with me partway up the ridge. He drove in just before dawn, he said. Engines quiet, no insignia, looked like ghosts. I asked if he saw them leave. He shook his head. Road was gone the next day, just trees, like they swallowed it. Midway through the trail, we found a broken guardrail. Twisted steel, scraped paint. The kind of mark vehicles make when they're trying not to stop. Beyond it, the road split into 2 tire-width ruts, faint but present. I followed them on foot, boots sinking into damp soil and ice. 50 meters in, the forest thinned, and there it was, an old service bridge, collapsed now, half of it swallowed by the ravine below. But on the intact side, partially buried,
The satellite room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you trust, but the kind that watches you. I stood alone under a low ceiling, flickering LEDs dancing across outdated consoles. Dust blanketed the screens, but the air smelled charged. They hadn't used this facility in years. NORAD shut it down after the Cold War, called it redundant, but someone had left it running. A lone monitor blinked, green text crawling across the black. Signal received, October 12, 1982, origin, Kamchatka. And below it, a line that should have been impossible. Match, Kravchenko.voicekey.75. He was dead. But the signal didn't care. The technician who flagged it was young. She thought it was an echo, radio bleed, maybe solar interference. But she printed it anyway. Left a note, unusual modulation, strong match, source confirmed. 3 weeks later, she disappeared. Officially, family emergency. I found her report sealed in a misfiled folder labeled training logs. It wasn't long, just enough to be disturbing. The signal had piggybacked on a civilian weather satellite, bounced across 2 military frequencies, then dropped clean into a dead NATO channel. It wasn't a broadcast. It was delivered. Inside the envelope, taped to the final page, was a flash drive. Old format. Encrypted. I cracked it on an air-gapped system. Only one file. kr75.return.aiff. I put on the headphones, clicked play, and waited for a dead man to speak. Static came first. Then a tone, long, low, like sonar through thick ice. Then his voice. They say when a man dies, his echo fades, but I am still here. He spoke slowly, clearly. I gave you the codes, I gave you the names, but I didn't give you the coordinates. A pause, then a sharp exhale, like pain.
The hallway smelled like old oil and cold metal. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, too dim to do much good. The door at the end was heavy, painted gray, corners rusting. I had to push twice before it opened. Inside, the air was still, stagnant, like the room hadn't breathed in years. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam, most of it torn or sagging. There was a single table, a chair, bolted to the floor. No windows, no clock, no past. I stepped in, and the door shut behind me. Not loud, not soft, just final. The floor creaked like it remembered. I'd read about this room, back when I still believed reports told the whole story. They called it Room 12C, a containment chamber for high-risk assets. Not a cell, not quite an office, something in between. Krovchenko was brought here 3 days after the safe house extraction. He never left. I knelt beside the chair. The straps were gone, but the metal rings still clung to the frame. One of them had snapped, twisted sideways like someone fought with the strength of desperation. The table was scratched, layers of stories, none finished. But near the edge, dried blood, dark, almost hidden under dust. No one had cleaned this room, just closed it. I sat down in the chair. It didn't creak. It welcomed me. I ran my hand across the underside of the table, smooth at first, then rough, a gouge. I crouched lower, pulled my flashlight out. The floor beneath the chair was stained, years of boots and tears pressed into tile. Then I saw it, etched into the concrete beneath the front right leg. Faint, shallow, but deliberate. 6 words. I was never meant to leave. The scratches were small, done with something sharp. Maybe a nail, maybe just a piece of broken metal. Not done in haste. The fog clung low to the trees, thick as smoke. Not moving, just waiting. I walked the perimeter of the old bunker in Plesetsk. Boots slow over frost-bitten grass, rifle slung but forgotten. The sky above was a sheet of dull gray, the kind that made noon look like dusk. Snow crusted over the concrete lip of the hatch I'd found weeks earlier. But this time, I wasn't looking at that one. 10 meters to the east, I saw it. Steel, glinting faintly beneath disturbed snow. A second hatch. Newer, unmarked, and sealed in a way that felt less like protection and more like denial. I scraped away snow with my gloves. The hatch was flush with the earth. No hinges exposed, but the locks, triple-layered, magnetic seals, newer than anything in the original complex. Someone wanted this door closed long after the Cold War ended. But they didn't count on time. Rust had set in. Cold had warped the seal. I slipped the edge of my field knife beneath the latch. Pried gently. The door gave with a sigh, metal shifting like lungs that hadn't breathed in years. Inside, stairs descended into dark. I clicked my flashlight. The beam trembled across rough walls, old Soviet paint, and something newer. Wires, cabling, power conduit. This wasn't abandoned, just buried. I stepped inside. The air was still, but it carried a scent I knew too well. Oil, dust, and old lies. At the base of the stairs, a corridor stretched ahead. Concrete, damp, no markings on the walls. I walked slowly. My footsteps echoed back at me. Offbeat, slightly delayed, as if someone else were following, one step behind. Dust coated the floor, thick, untouched. But 20 meters in, I saw them. Footprints. One pair, narrow tread, moving forward, then stopping. No return prints, no scuff marks, no drag lines. Just a trail that vanished in the middle of the hallway.